Welcome to Manager Tools. This week, the Manager Tools Chatbot. Great management advice. This podcast answers these questions. Why did Manager Tools create a chatbot? How does the chatbot work? And also, how did we create it? And lastly, what can I do as a user to get the most out of the Manager Tools chatbot? If you want answers to those questions and more, keep listening. Here we go.
If you're an organization with September 30th as your year end, you have only one quarter left to meet all of your training targets. September is typically a busy organizational training month for Manager Tools, in part because of the September 30th end date. Don't wait to contact Maggie now, so she can work with you to get your training needs filled. Email us at customerservice@manager-tools.com.
Okay, Mike.
Hey, dude.
This is a rare instance where I am the host of the show, I guess, and you are the guest. No, that's not right. But I'm going to ask you questions this time.
Nice.
And I've also, by the way, got some special questions that you have not yet seen that I'll be looking forward to asking you.
Nice. Okay.
Because this guidance is about something incredibly unique that, according to the audience that I've talked to, people are astounded that we did this all ourselves, or more precisely, you did it entirely by yourself, the creation of what we are calling ChatMT, which is the Manager Tools chatbot. And it basically allows people to come to the website using chat technology, AI-driven chat technology, and ask any question you want about management. And the basis for the guidance that the bot will provide is only our material.
Yeah. If all goes well.
Well, it's already going.
Yeah.
We're in beta, right? Where it's already been released, and we're getting great responses back from the many people in the licensee community who are using it. And for the record, folks, the ChatMT is only available for licensees. So if you're not a licensee and you like what you hear in this podcast, we certainly want you to become a licensee so you can ask any question you want. You don't have to go searching through 10 or 15 or 1,000 podcasts, because I think we have over 1,500 podcasts out there in the wild, I think now, Mike, right? Yeah. And that's a lot of stuff to sift through. And we routinely get questions. I'm sure you do, Mike. I do. Other people do all the time. Can you tell me the podcast where this happened?
Right.
And it's got to the point, 10 years ago, that was a little easier than it is now. So our outline is really simple. I'm going to ask Mike 3 big questions followed by some small questions. The 3 big questions are, why do we do it? How does it work? And then ultimately, what can the user do to get the most out of it? Because according to Mike and many other people we've been talking to, a lot of people like the idea of chat bots, but they don't really know how to interact with them. They don't know what the skills are, how to follow an answer with a better, more detailed question, and so on.
I'm ready. Let's rock and roll.
Cool. By the way, folks, when we record, we're doing this on Zoom, so I can see him and he can see me, and he just looks pretty darn calm there.
Pretty chill.
Just
Yeah.
pretty chill. All right. So why did we create the chatbot, dude?
Yeah, I don't know.
I'm going to remember that. And you're going to ask me a question on executive tools sometime in the next 6 months. And I'm going to say, I
don't know. I hadn't thought about that.
I haven't really thought about that.
Well, the bottom line is we just want to make getting our content easier for our customers, right? That is it.
Access
When you need it. Like often people, they write you, right? And they need an answer now. And they say, would you please respond within the next 24 hours, right? So I've always thought about it as, Mark, Kate, Sarah, Amanda in a box, right? The ability to get the answers to the questions when you have them. Now, what about how we've delivered stuff in the past makes this particularly useful? I think one of you mentioned it, like over 1,500 podcasts. The challenge is discoverability, right? Of finding the information you have. We have, it's been almost 20 years, right? At 20 years, there is a lot of podcasts. We cover a very broad front of management advice. And buried in there somewhere is the answer to your question. I'm confident of that. The question is, where is it? And when you have 1,500 podcasts, and most people are consuming those via podcast, that's a lot of hours of podcast to sift through. So I think there are many in our community that sometimes feel as if they're looking for the proverbial needle in a haystack of content that is manager tools. So that's difficult for listeners. It's particularly difficult for new listeners who don't even really have a clue as to where to start, and particularly difficult when they need the content now. So a reasonable question is, why not just use ChatGPT? It already exists.
Well, you did use ChatGPT in creation, but people are asking, why not just use ChatGPT?
Yeah, the existing ChatGPT, right?
Yeah, okay.
I mean, it's a great question. From my perspective, the problem is, look at when people are in pain, they reach for the medicine or the source of information that's going to promise them a quick relief from that pain. And if, this is one of the reasons why we built it, if that source is the web or is ChatGPT, which is kind of a non-specific chatbot, very similar to what we've done, obviously, if that's the answer, people will use it. If they don't have an alternative, they're going to use it. And the problem is, we've talked about this many, many times. I think you've described this probably in hundreds of times and things I think, is that there's a lot of bad management advice out there.
Oh my God.
Right? I mean, it's awful.
In Harvard Business Review, there's bad management guidance. Never used to be in my entire career. Only in the last 5 years has it gotten bad, but that's a really bad thing. Wall Street Journal, same thing. And it finally occurred to you and I like 10 or 15 years ago, if they're bad, what's good?
Yeah, exactly. Like the wisdom of the crowds. You know, if you think about, if I need advice on my management career, am I going to rely on the wisdom of the crowds to tell me how to do something that could potentially end my career or shorten it or affect my ability to take care of my family? So the source of information is critical, right? You want to be able to trust the information. And ChatGPT, then I'm just not a knock on them. It's just the way it's done. Is we'll talk later about kind of the amount of data that's required to build these models like ChatGPT. They're building it largely on the source of the web. Matter of fact, one of the problems in chat today is they're running out of data. If you index the entire web, that's where your answers are going to come from. And, you know, do you want some amateurs management advice really to show up when you're asking for critical information?
It's interesting you mentioned that, because I was talking to somebody the other day and they said, well, yeah, there are a lot of amateurs out there, but there's probably, as people learn, they try those things aren't as popular and so on. But here's the thing that I said in response, and they were stunned. I said, if you have an amateur saying X and somebody knowledgeable saying Y, and they take the same number of words, ChatGPT gives them the same number, same weight. They're literally weighted the same. There is an assumption that quantity serves for quality.
That's right. There's no editing of content for factual unbelievability. So I believe that, look at the ChatGPT exists. People are going to use it. If we don't deliver an alternative to that they can use and trust, then we're not serving our customer base, right? I feel kind of obligated. If we can do it, we should do it. So that's kind of the key piece of it. Now, the other thing is, as kind of we'll talk a little bit later about the progress of ChatGPT and the availability of the technology. This is not all that different from our original vision. Before we had published our 5th podcast, I can't remember precisely when we came up with the idea, but you'll remember Joe Dirt, right? Mm-hmm. Joe Dirt is an homage to a movie of the same name from some years back.
Yeah.
You don't got to go look it up. We thought it was funny. It was kind of cute.
Dorky.
Yeah, very
much our style.
Very David Spade was in it, right? So just, think of that.
Extrapolate from there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And the subject of the movie and the theme of the movie has nothing to do with what we mean by Joe Dirt. Joe Dirt was just a simple name for Dirt Simple, right?
Exactly.
And we envisioned a web page. It's not our homepage today, but envisioned a web page that was like Google, right? It was a blank page. It had one search box and it had a button, said go, and underneath it said, give us your management question, and we'd have the answer.
Right. It's like you can Google who won the 1927 World Series. The Yankees did, 4-0, right? There was Murderers Row, it was Gehrig and Ruth and so on. And you take for granted that you can do that. And what we are trying to do with Joe Dirt is we know this stuff. We want to help you know it. Can we figure out a way to put that thing in there and you can query, and we would build a search engine that would look only at our stuff and come back with it. And finally, literally close to 20 years later, the tool exists.
Yeah. And when ChatGPT came out, my immediate reaction was, Joe Dirt. This is it.
Yeah.
This is it.
And we've always been looking for it, but it's not been there for, again, 20 years. So talk a little bit about the issues relative to IP challenges.
Well, yeah.
Because that's a problem for us, right?
Yeah, it's a real problem for us. And those issues exist. And not just for us, for any content creator out there. There's an article recently about Perplexity, which is a kind of a combination AI search tool, kind of a potential replacement for Google. At least I think that's what they hope it is. And they recently had a feature where you could create papers. And it turns out that they just like literally plagiarize stuff from other content creators. And by the way, that content was behind firewalls, right? So
really,
I mean, paywalls, right?
Yeah.
And it's challenging for for those in the content creation space, which is a lot of people, not just us, but artists and photographers and you name it, people making movies. The idea that somebody could write an engine, scrape your stuff off the web and deliver it without you being compensated for your work is just a huge deal. Now, we're not going to solve that problem. Hopefully the courts will.
Yeah.
I'm concerned about it. We'll see where things go. I'm not smart enough to predict where that's going to end up, but it's a risk for us, right? It's a risk for us. And we've just decided, like, we can't do anything about what people are doing. That we can't. We're not going after Google or Perplexity or ChatGPT, OpenAI. We can't do that. What we can do, though, is provide an alternative that's the best we can make it, such that people use ours versus somebody else's stuff that might be ripping us off. So best defense is an offense sometimes, and that's what we're doing there.
Okay, good. So again, we're going back to Joe Dirt. We want to make it dead simple. The idea is you can come to the chat prompt and you can write in, how can I help one of my directs who's struggling with his goals? Or is there a good way to prepare for my boss's one-on-one with me? Or if I'm a new manager, what tools can I use to get to know my people? Or I've been managing my team for a while. Is there some sort of feedback mechanism you recommend so that I can learn what they like and what they don't like, what I need to change, and so on? That's the idea.
Yeah.
Now, we're going to get into some technical stuff, folks, and you have to understand something. Sometimes when Mike talks, I don't understand him. Most people focus on what I know about management after nearly 20 years hosting the Manager Tools podcast. But all of the engines behind the scenes of Manager Tools in the very beginning were all Mike. And he's going to downplay it, but he built this entire chatbot all by himself with the idea that we didn't want to clutter it up with other management guidance, which is stupid. If management guidance is popular, at least right now, until Manager Tools becomes incredibly popular and we have 10 billion downloads rather than only 250 million. Until that happens, all management guidance that's popular, which would be the reason you would hear about it, means it's stupid. I wish that were not so. I don't know that there are that many fields of endeavor in the world where that's true, but it is in ours. I wish I could go to a battle of the bands with me and 5 other management influencers or thinkers or gurus and have people in the audience ask real life manager questions and just demolish the competition with specificity and actionability and deep background and so on. But nobody's asking me to go on that show yet. When they do, I'll go. Believe me, I'll pay my own way.
We should do that. That'd be awesome.
Yeah, it'd be good. All right. So we need to get into a little bit of the technical underpinnings because we have a healthy part of our audience that really, really gets into this kind of stuff and is going to pepper Mike with questions about this. So we wanted to save Mike from 500 emails. So Mike, take a few minutes and tell us all how it works, because to most of us, it's a little magical. There's a little bit of like distinction from reality that it's amazing that we didn't have this and we don't know how it works, but we're glad it does.
It's pretty cool. It's not magic though. Just one other thing to add to your, reasons why we're talking about this. My belief is that this is a pretty fundamental technology that is going to change the way work is done today. A lot of work. It will also create great opportunity. I don't subscribe to the idea that it's going to put everybody out of a job and there's nothing to do. That's, that when the car was invented and produced, it didn't put everybody out of jobs, right? They did different jobs, right? So I'm very positive about the future in that regard. But it's going to be pretty significant in terms of what it can do and the work it can do for us. And because of that, I believe that most of our audience should have an understanding of how it works and what it does, such that they use it appropriately, right? They know its strengths, they know its weaknesses, and they can participate in conversations about how the company might decide to use or not use the technology. So I think it's most professionals today know how to use Microsoft Excel or some spreadsheet,
Sure,
right? Or Microsoft Word, or name your favorite program. Well, this is one of those. This is one of those technology I believe everybody ought to use. Okay, so underlying this is something called a large language model. In this particular, ChatGPT is what I'm talking about. And it was developed by OpenAI, and it's really designed to understand and generate human-like text. Now, images and stuff, more is coming, but we're just talking about kind of text for now, based on input it receives. So let's talk a little bit more detail about what it does. So number one, they built this large language model, which is just a bunch of it's neural networks. I am not the guy to talk to you about neural networks work. I have an idea, but we're not going to go into there. So just say artificial intelligence, right? And so they trained ChatGPT on a huge, diverse data set that included books and articles, websites, probably just about everyone out there, and other text sources. And then they use that data set to model the various aspects of human language. So they use machine learning, and actually a special form of it called deep learning, to process and learn from that data. And what this model does is it recognizes patterns, associations, and the structure of language, right? And that knowledge is what allows ChatGPT to have human-like conversations around both understanding what it's being asked and delivering answers.
To be clear, it doesn't actually understand what it's being asked. It only knows that different words are associated with other words based on percentages, based on the size of the language model. And the word "the" is rarely followed by the word "is" or "it" or "tomorrow," the tomorrow, right? And so it doesn't relate those things the same way.
It's a giant pattern recognition engine, right? You studied math in college, right? Correlations. It's a giant correlation engine, right? This word, right, is very correlated with this other word, or often follows this other word. Or if you have these three words that occur together in a row, the most likely next word is it, or whatever, right? So it's a giant correlation engine. It understands the relationships between words. And not just the word itself, but the meaning of the word, which is a pretty critical distinction, right? The semantic meaning of a word. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. Now, I'll give you some idea in terms of like the size of this thing. Think about an equation. You fed something into an equation and it gave you an answer. Think about a function that had 175 billion parameters. That's kind of the way to think about this thing, right?
This is like the philosophy final exam that says define the universe, be specific, give 2 examples. I can't even get my head around.
Oh, it's just crazy.
That amount of numbers. I can't.
And all those parameters it's not a straight equation like I just described. It's all embedded in a neural network where all those parameters exist, but 175 billion parameters. Now, I read that ChatGPT 4 has 175 billion parameters. I've heard other people say that is closer to 1 trillion parameters. It really doesn't matter other than it's a really big number, right? So the training they do, basically feeding in text and trying to train it that it could predict the outcome is what allows you to kind of have this natural language kind of conversation. Now, the cost, early on in Manager Tools, I followed AI for a while, for several decades, actually, at some level. And we talked about, like, someday this could be something we could do something with this technology. The problem is the cost of building something like this is just extraordinary.
Mike, when you say extraordinary, is it millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions, or billions of dollars?
100 million. Just to train ChatGPT 4. Forget about all the other money they invested to get to the point they understood it well enough. ChatGPT 4 to train that, $100 million. That's at least what Sam Altman says, right? Yeah. So a huge, huge amount of money. Now, interesting, the cool thing was, and what really excited me is that I never in my life imagined that somebody would build that kind of capability and provide those capabilities, the use of that technology to others as an API.
Yes.
That's what stunned me. I just assumed, now, obviously I'm wrong. People are much smarter than me, are thinking about it, that there's an economic reason for doing that. I just assumed that if somebody ever built that technology, they'd hold it to themselves and they'd figure out a way to leverage it without extending that API to everybody.
Sell it to other big companies for massive amounts of money. And
this is the great thing about capital markets, right?
Right.
The fact that somebody built this technology and made it available to everybody. So that's kind of the technology, right? It has, its key function. It can take input, a question written in normal language, understand what it means, and then generate responses based on it. So you can have a conversation. That's kind of the core of it. We could go on for hours about large language models, but at a high level, that's kind of how we're just think of it as a giant correlation engine. That's the way to think about it.
So can I ask a couple of questions about these large language model, ChatGPT and so on? You're saying that when somebody, whether they're in our community or not, just any regular guy or gal, goes to use a chatbot that is large language model AI enabled, and they ask a question of it, it is essentially mining the words they write in, and based on what it quote unquote knows about all the words it has scooped up in the universe of human publication, the web making it a great deal easier. I can't imagine ChatGPT existing before the web existed to vacuum up all this information.
At some point, the internet will be viewed as simply the precursor to AI. That's what I believe. Yeah. The internet will just be the building block. It won't be the important thing. Right. The important thing will be artificial intelligence.
We put virtually everything we know out in a searchable format, and AI
scooped it up.
Was literally begged to be invented to scoop up everything and to create something that appears, that is, we are so impressed by our own creation that we call it artificial intelligence. Okay, but they come and they ask that question, and basically everything, when they go anywhere else but us, they go and ask a question of something. It uses its computing power to determine a specific example based on all the words it's looked at, all the connections, all the math it's ever done. It doesn't actually know what it's saying, but it knows.
It does not.
Nor the meaning.
Right. It's not intelligent the way we think of it. It's just, again, it's a prediction machine. Matter of fact, let's break it down, make it even simpler than that. If you ask it a question, the first thing it does, right, in looking at the model that's been built, right? So there's two pieces. One is the building of the model. I talked about the $100 million to build the model. right?
Right.
And that's a huge amount of compute resources, millions and millions of dollars of just compute resources,
Right.
probably in the order of $35-40 million just in CPU cost to train the model. Then the next piece of it is the inference, which is, okay, I built the model. I have this equation with all these parameters, and I ask it questions and it gives me a response. Okay. When it generates the response based on your question, the first thing it does just predicts, given this question and all I know about the association of the semantic meaning of that question, the next word, the first word is the. Then the next step is, okay, given the question and the first word being the, what is the next word? And then
Right.
it does that until it delivers something that makes sense, right? That's actually one of the primary training objectives of the LLM is to be able to converse in English, right? So it just predicts word after word after word after word. Matter of fact, that's why I think people have gotten used to the idea, but ChatGPT is getting much faster, but it's slow. And when you ask a question, you could see it would spit out word after word after, it would stream it versus just give you the answer. Well, the reason was being because it was spitting out the words at the same rate that it was discovering those words. If they waited till the very end, the user interface would just seem really super
It would
slow.
be terrible.
So it's more like a teletype.
So can we assume in the next couple of years, the models won't grow as fast as computing capability applied to it, and you'll get a much more snappy answer without the word by word by word thing? Or are they going to keep adding to the models and the complexity of the algorithm such that it will be the old Wintel thing of Windows and Intel? Intel gives you more computing power and Windows quickly eats it up. And so it'll still be slow, or do you expect it to get fast?
I expect it to get incredibly fast. It already is. It's if you go to some of the ChatGPT 4 in particular, the latest model, it's really fast. And at some point it will seem real time. Matter of fact, that's the way we talk, right? That's what we do, right? We don't, well, other than Mark Horstman, everybody other than Mark Horstman, generally, you know your next few words. You certainly don't know the whole paragraph, and you certainly don't know 30 minutes worth of words, right? You're kind of essentially making it up as you go. Well, that's exactly how the large language models work.
Yeah, okay. So if it doesn't actually know, doesn't have cognizance of what it is saying, and somebody goes to another ChatGPT site and asks a management question, they're going to get what the model thinks is smart, which is essentially what is most popular, because this word, which is, let's say, coaching, is always associated with an employee being in trouble, for instance.
Yeah, it's great. It's a great example of that.
And so therefore the ChatGPT model would recommend coaching when in fact it doesn't know what coaching is, other than a lot of people in the world have said, if an employee is in trouble, you should coach them.
Exactly right. There's a correlation between the word coaching and the concept of employee being in trouble.
Yeah.
Right. And we go like, well, that's not right.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting about that, though, is I think there are a lot of people who are listening who would say, well, that is right, because a lot of people say that. But then a lot of people say the world is flat. And I know what your people are going to say, but yeah, more people say the world is round. Actually, you'd be surprised at how few people say the world is round, because it's taken for granted, and things that are taken for granted aren't talked about, right?
Yeah. Well, same thing. Feedback, if you look on the web, is largely associated with giving people negative feedback.
Exactly. That's exactly what it is.
But if we were to advise a manager on how to behave, we would tell them, yeah, that's true. You can give people feedback that's negative, but 90% of the feedback you give ought to be positive. Well, that's not represented in the wisdoms of the crowd on the internet, right?
Right.
That's
exactly.
another example where bad advice could come out of something built on the wisdom of the crowds.
Yeah, maybe actually we should write a book called The Crowd is Stupid, at least as far as it comes to management.
Yeah. Well, we said SMART goals was stupid, so why not?
Yeah. Okay. So isn't a chatbot as simple as taking a user's question. Somebody comes to our website and asks it a question. It gets sent to OpenAI or our interface that you've built. You built the entire thing yourself so we can protect our IP. And it looks through all of our stuff, but it uses the OpenAI engine to do it, I assume. And then an answer is given.
Yeah, I wish that was the case, but it's really not. In my hallucination, I shouldn't use that word because I'm going to use it in a different context. But my thought was that, hey, this should be fairly straightforward. Get a question, send it off to OpenAI, and get the answer back. But clearly, at the very beginning, it became clear that that was not the way to do it because these AI language models like ChatGPT have this tendency to do something called hallucination. So what is hallucination? Well, it refers to instances where the model generates information or data that's factually incorrect, it's misleading, or it's not based in reality, yet sounds plausible or authoritative. As a matter of fact, when it is wrong, it does it very convincingly.
Well, but you know what's funny about that? I actually believe the definition of it doing it convincingly, first of all, it doesn't understand the concept of being convincing. The person that's convinced is the one that is deciding on the convincibility of it. And we've imbued the thing with the name artificial intelligence. Mm-hmm. And so therefore, and we ask it a bunch of simple questions, it gets it right. We graduate to a much more complex answer. And we therefore believe what it told us when in fact, the complexity of the question we ask would be hard to answer for even some really, really smart people. And so my problem with hallucination is not that it occurs on simple stuff, because if it's simple stuff, people know it's hallucinating. Well, that's clearly wrong.
Right.
That didn't happen, but it's the more complex stuff. And I would argue, I always used to say that interviewing is a black box, but I would argue that management, I didn't know until I started teaching management that it was such a black box. People don't understand it, that they literally don't know. They're not, no offense, folks, sorry to say this, but the average manager or certainly individual contributor is not a smart consumer of management guidance. And so they end up going with popular, and the bot doesn't know that it's essentially hallucinating after a fashion by making up stuff. And again, the audience is convinced because they don't know not to be convinced.
Yeah. And they go do something like, I don't know, giving feedback to their boss.
Yeah. Dude, we talked about this for years and years and years, nearly 20 years now, ever since we started. The problem for most people with management guidance is there are people out there willing to give you guidance, and they don't know what they're doing. And they're not going to suffer with you if it turns out to hurt you. We know things we can tell certain people that we can't tell everybody, that we don't share widely. And the reason why is the first rule of being someone who's making recommendations is do no harm. We can't give guidance that will work for half the people and get the other half fired.
That's right.
We have to give guidance that will work for 90% of the people. That's our statement, 90% of the people, 90% of the time. And if they do it, the other 10% won't get hurt.
Yeah. Well, look at, you just described why this hallucination problem, it's an insidious form of evil. I mean, it is bad.
Yeah.
And so a lot of our effort is around solving for that particular problem. So just real quick, why does this hallucination occur? Well,
yeah.
One is we talked about like lack of a ground truth, right? If there's bad management advice on the internet, stuff that is just
it will repeat
wrong, it will use that as a potential source of the truth. So that's pretty clear. You know, there's other issues around kind of training data limitations.
Yeah. Can I just go back?
Yeah.
I think that's important. The average management guidance on the web is wrong. And so the average output of a ChatGPT algorithm is going to be wrong relative to management guidance. You could ask it about a recipe for chicken cacciatore. There are probably no really bad chicken cacciatore recipes, because if you make a really bad one, nobody will go to it. It won't get a lot of hits, or people know that's not chicken cacciatore. You wouldn't put a whole bunch of bad chicken cacciatore recipes on the web. So with management, though, people don't know. And there are all kinds of people putting all kinds of stuff out there and they don't know. And all of it is just smushed together. There's all kinds of math done about how much more used or mentioned is the sandwich technique versus the feedback model, positive and negative, and so on. And yeah, there's just bad data out there. Okay. So that's what the model people call ground truth.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Bad raw data, essentially.
Then there's also limitations about the training data. It's very similar to the first problem I disagreed. But if you think about the breadth of the data, right, and this general approach to creating associations, right, it leads to conflations and misinterpretation of facts. So even if the data is correct, this piece of truth is still sitting there in the context of all this other data. And again, it's a big correlation engine. It's drawing relationships between stuff, and it can come up with something, if A equals 1 and B equals 2, and you add them together, it should be 5. So it can it can create these associations that are just not accurate.
Right.
The other thing is, a big piece of hallucination is based upon complex input. So people can ask very complicated questions. And the input can be complex, it can be ambiguous. And so these models, what they tend to do is they tend to guess aspects of the response, which leads to plausible but incorrect results.
Wow. Yeah. And I assume there's work being done trying to address this. I assume that the movers and shakers in the AI world recognize that the average user is going to say, guys, you can't tell me wrong stuff.
Yeah, this is what this problem is widely known. And, people are looking at different training techniques, different model architectures, right? Data quality, trying to figure out how to get better quality data.
Get the right stuff in there. Yeah.
Yeah. And look at this can get better over time. It will. But until then, we still have the issues. And so we're operating in today's world. We'll see where it ends up. There's all sorts of different things, chain of reasoning that, some people are looking at not only just getting the answers. Like, for example, if they were going to do management stuff, they might talk to Mark Horstman and go like, okay, here's your answer. Now let's break down your chain of reasoning. How did you come up with this answer? What are the things you considered? So considering the chain of reasoning versus just the output. And right now, these models are focused on the output. They don't have the chain of reasoning, right? All they have is you wrote this paper, but how you got there, they don't understand that. So there's all sorts of things going on.
Yeah, I find that a lot when I give guidance to people. I find that they extrapolate a recommendation that I made to one person in one situation, and they think it would therefore be useful in theirs because they mistakenly equate the two scenarios, the one that I had previously given guidance to and theirs, as the same. They apply it and they're shocked that it doesn't work. I'm like, dude, I would never recommend you do that in that situation. No, this is a completely different. His boss doesn't trust him. Your boss trusts you. His directs are really not very good at their jobs. Your people are really good at your jobs. You should not be doing that. You should be doing this.
That's right. And that if you thought of that person as an AI model, the problem is they have lack of information. They've conflated some things. They've created a relationship between two different things that doesn't exist. So this hallucination, as most people listening probably go like, I'm not sure I want to trust my management problems to that. And you'd be right. The other issue is one of traceability. Again, it's another thing people are working on trying to solve. If there is any doubt whatsoever about what you've been told, then it's really nice to know, where did that come from? So right now, folks, if you trust your management advice and career to manage tools, you're trusting Mark Horstman, and so you know where it comes from. And if you want accountability, he's the other guy on this conversation right here.
Yeah. Email me and I'll be happy to answer in detail.
Now, like when we wrote papers way back when we were writing, you're actually writing papers. You're writing actually novels, not novels. You're writing books. You're writing books, and you're writing like the equivalent of a long form piece several times a week. So but when we wrote in school, we had to cite references.
Yeah.
Try to do that today in ChatGPT, right? Again, they're working on it. It's going to get better. But before you trust your management advice, you like to know where it came from, where the source material is. And so we wanted to do that. We believe that our stuff fits together. It's a system managed that works, that's internally consistent. And we've gone a step further with the chatbot. So when you get an answer, you get a reference to the show notes from which that answer came. So if you need more information around the context, you have the reference. So again, traceability is a big piece that's missing today. Again, people are working on it, but for what we believe is appropriate, it's not quite there. Okay. Then the question is, okay, how do you solve this problem? And the current approach is something called retrieval augmented generation.
Another RAG report.
Another RAG report. Now, this RAG is different. So essentially what we're doing, the approach is to combine internal trusted source of information. And in our world, it's our show notes. Okay. People ought to understand that. And then combining that with the natural language interface to information provided by LLMs. So we're essentially combining our knowledge and the LLM's capability to have a conversation about that knowledge. So that's what we're doing. So let's talk specifically what we're doing at Manager Tools.
Right.
I think it's fairly straightforward. But
yeah, sometimes, folks, if you're listening to him and you don't think it's fairly straightforward, you're just like me. He talks over my head sometimes, and
I'm
lucky
not
to have
as skilled at communicating as you are. So I wish I could communicate about this the way you communicate about management.
It's like you describe a black hole and you're specific in action, but I still don't understand black holes because only people as smart as you can describe black holes.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, you're not as smart as me. Yeah. Nobody's buying that, dude. Nobody's buying that. I mean, you graduated from West Point one spot higher than I did. So obviously
that's a good answer to a trivia question. I always tell people, feel free to ask Mike where he graduated in his class. He won't tell you where he graduated. He'll just tell you one behind Mark.
Yeah, that's all I care about.
What we've never really said, though, is it's pretty high up in the class for both of us.
Yeah, we did okay.
Yeah, we did good. Yeah.
So, okay, I already described the source information as show notes. We're using OpenAI's ChatGPT-4 interface, one of the most advanced models for the LLM. And the process looks very similar to this. We get the question from you, the user. We then use that information, the question, to go retrieve the relevant documents from a database repository of all empty show note content.
And nothing else.
We use our internal information and our
only.
Right? We then take those documents that we retrieved along with the question, and then we pass it to OpenAI and tell OpenAI, answer the question using only the documents we're providing. Simple as that. Here's a question, the source of truth. The truth are in these documents. Now use your magic about how to communicate in natural language and answer this question using this content. And then we get the answer from OpenAI and we give it to users. That is kind of the basic process. I'll go a little bit more detail in terms of how we do that. One other additional point, and this is one of those things that is useful to understand, because if you understand this, you'll be able to use not only our chatbot better, but you'll be able to use other chatbots because they essentially do the same thing, or most of them do exactly the same thing, which is not only do we, let me back up. Within the chatbot, in ChatGPT or in ChatMT, you have the ability to create multiple quote unquote chats, right? Conversations, right? So you can have multiple conversations as opposed to just one long-winded conversation altogether, which is not how we have conversations with people, right? That's generally not the way it works. And matter of fact, when people engage in behavior that is distinctly different than that, we tell them that they're going down a rabbit hole, or it's a non sequitur, or something like that. So within the context of one chat, not only do we pass the relevant documents and the question, if you refine your question, right, or you say something like, nah, that's not quite it, I'm really talking about, and then you say something more specific, We take the entire conversation and send it along to OpenAI as well. It can see what it did well, what it did poorly, and then use that information to give a better answer.
That's one thing I've noticed when I've done that, when I've interacted with our chatbot and I'm looking for something specific. It does a very good job of starting to hone in on what I'm actually looking for.
Yeah.
As opposed to just spouting generally. It may take me a couple of questions because I have the curse of knowledge. All of the stuff it knows because I wrote it. And the curse of knowledge is once you know something, you forget that you ever didn't know it. And then I start realizing my question was too broad and I'm able to ask more specific questions. Yeah.
Yeah. That's a very different process than you generally engage with in terms of a search engine, right?
Right.
You type in your question or what you're searching for, essentially not even really a question, what you're searching for, and it gives you a response. You don't then type in something else and expect it to remember what the previous, it's a brand new search. Chatbots don't work that way. And if you treat it like a search engine, you're really not going to get the results that you're looking for.
Ever wondered how to convince a colleague of something? Good news. We can teach you how to do that better in our Effective Communicator training. And we're hosting a virtual Effective Communicator conference over Zoom on July 9th. In the session, you can learn how to identify another person's DISC profile in just a few minutes. With your MT DISC output that comes with the training, you can also learn how to tailor your communications to others and hopefully convince them your idea is great. Sign up at manager-tools.com/training. See you soon.
All right. So now we get to probably what at least the audience who's like you and me, the high Ds in the audience, really want to know, which is, okay, I like the idea. I like being able to only search your stuff. So we're going to have a lot less chance of hallucination. It's not going to mention sandwich technique. It's not going to mention monthly one-on-ones, or somebody recently posted on Twitter 2-on-1s or 1-on-3s because they just don't have enough time. Interestingly, in a 57-person company. Ah, you ignorant fool. But I want to be able to ask, and I don't want to have to listen to podcasts. And even if I'm a licensee, I don't want to have to go through my show notes, although that's what I would do, is go through show notes. But now with this is what I would do. What else? How can I be a good consumer of the chatbot so that I get back better results? I'd much rather be a smart shopper than a dumb shopper. So
Sure.
What can I do in my interaction with the tool to get better results?
Okay, so one is you could go out and study papers on something referred to as prompt engineering, and you'd be able to do everything I'm going to describe here.
Well, interestingly, the Wall Street Journal, Joanna Stern, one of the Wall Street Journal technology columnists, had a recent article a few weeks ago about she discovered that prompt engineer jobs paid $200,000 a year, and so she was going to go find out whether she could be a prompt engineer.
Yeah, I read that as well, which I find kind of funny because probably at some point, somebody thought that they're really good at Google searches and they could probably make $200,000 a year being paid to do Google searches. And ultimately, people figured out how to use search engines, right? I think prompt engineering is something very similar. That it's new. These chatbot interfaces are very new, and it won't be too long before people kind of develop an intuitive understanding of how it works. But until then, it's probably useful.
Give us some guidance.
So one is just be clear and specific. Clearly state what you know or what you want to know or achieve with your question. The more specific you are, the more likely you are to get a precise and useful answer. For example, instead of asking, how do I use the MT disk to improve my direct? Be a little bit more specific. Ask a more specific questions like, I'm a high D. What can I do to be more effective when writing an email to a high C direct?
Oh, that's good. It's 3 layers. First, you tell them about you tell them about the other person, then you tell them about the specific context.
Specifically, I'm doing, right?
Yeah.
And you're going to get a much better result. And now you understand, if based upon what we've already covered, we've talked about today, you understand, okay, it's empty disk related. The chatbot can be smart enough to go out and retrieve documents that are associated with disk and associated with a high D and a high C, writing an email. And guess what? There might be something in the Manager Tools repository about that. Okay. The more information you can give it, right? So, providing context, right? And I did a little bit about it in this previous example. So providing context, background information, like who you are, what you're trying to do, what you're trying to achieve, some history. So, for example, instead of saying, how do I give feedback to my direct? You might say, how do I give feedback to my direct on being consistently late to weekly staff meetings? Again, very similar to the previous example, but being clear and specific and context can be very, very useful. Now, if you're a Manager Tools fan and you've been around for a while and you know about feedback and about using behavior and giving feedback to directs, if you think about giving feedback is similar to what you might ask about a chatbot, using the same kind of things, describing in detail what you want, you won't be far off the path. Use keywords, just like, it's very analogous to search engine. If you're interested in improving the performance of a direct, well, help the chatbot understand what you mean by that. Use terms like in your question, use terms like productivity, efficiency.
As opposed to how to help my direct get better.
Yeah. Well, define better, right? Well, what does it mean? In a work context, it means productivity, efficiency, quality and quantity of output.
Yeah.
Right? Or even better, use specific outcomes. How do I help them get better at timely and efficient reporting?
I love this. Oh, see, I can already, I'm already learning. I already can see where I could have done better on some of my prompts. No question.
Good.
By the way, I do like the fact that they're calling it prompts, because that's not what I think when I do a Google search. Right?
Right. It's different.
So you're actually prompting someone else, just like in a conversation. And I think prompt versus search is a helpful way. You could see where they're similar, but the different word, God, if they'd said, just do a search of AI, that would be bad, because we would then apply our search engine brain rather than I'm prompting this. And if I prompt somebody and I don't get the answer I want, I prompt them again differently, more precisely.
Yeah, exactly.
Good.
Yeah, it's got to become a conversation, right?
Yeah.
Ask what you need. There's a funny one, and if you're listening, dude, don't take it wrong. But somebody, you can imagine, we got a negative rating. So, by the way, in the chatbot, you can give negative, positive. It helps us improve, right?
Yeah.
So we're absolutely looking for it.
Please do put thumbs up, thumbs down when you get responses from the chatbot.
And I'm not complaining, folks. But if you type in feedback, enter, that you're not going to get a great response. So just ask what you need. Can you provide a summary of the key points of the Manager Tools feedback model? So if you want a summary, ask for a summary. If you want a list of something, it's actually one of my favorite things to do is if I'm asking for some information about something, I say, would you please give me a list of the key points of the Manager Tools feedback model? Now I'm a high C, so I love lists. I use that all the time. But tell people what you want. Avoid ambiguity, right? Basically, kind of know how the AI works. You just want to stop it from going down the wrong path. So be clear as possible about what you want. Avoid misunderstandings. For example, use the phrase performance review instead of review. There's a big difference between a review and a performance review. If you're talking about a typical end of the year performance evaluations, right?
Yeah, I think I've gotten lucky with that because I try to be very specific when I write show notes. This is not one I would have thought of naturally because I haven't been getting ambiguous answers, but it's only because I try to choose very carefully. But I can see where context, that was a mistake for me. No question.
Yeah, and in the context of Manager Tools for our chat, it's a little bit better because we're going and we're looking for review, and we don't use review in many other contexts than performance reviews, right? So now, but if you're using ChatGPT and going out to the public, you might get a very different result. So
yeah, strategic reviews, operations reviews, personnel reviews, project reviews, governmental reviews.
Yeah. And then last, if you don't get the answer you'd like, right? Or
you don't understand. Yeah,
you don't understand
right.
Just ask it a different way, right? Just same question, just word it a little bit differently. And again, most chatbots are sending the previous questions and answers along with the new one. And generally the LLMs will kind of self-correct and you'll start narrowing down to what you really want. And it's my experience, it's just not ChatMT, but I find that It only takes 2 or 3 pieces of conversation to narrow it down pretty quickly. So those are some simple things. If you do that, you don't have to read a paper on prompt engineering. You've pretty much solved your problem. And I said it, I'll just say it again, like all this stuff applies. It's not specific to ChatMT. It work with any chatbot. Using these techniques will put you in good stead.
Yeah. Well, and I've got a treat for you, Mike, and for the audience. I did something in this podcast I have never done in any of our previous 2,000 or so podcasts the last 2 decades. I typed. Yeah, I did. Because I'm not talking 90% of the time, I cheated a little bit. I regret it. I apologize. If anybody ever says, Mark, have you ever typed or done something not related, somehow
to a conversation,
I would be able to say no up until today.
Done that.
Right. Okay. But here's what I did. You mentioned, I really like the context piece about how can I use empty disk to relate better or communicate better with my direct? And then you said, no, you need to give it more context. What are you? What are they? And then also in what way? And so I typed in the prompt of, I'm a high D. How can I write an effective email to my high C direct? Okay. Now, guys, to be clear, if you don't know DISC, and I encourage you, you need to know it because communication is what the listener does. All communication is persuasion. I know you high Cs don't think that, but it's a force of nature. It's a rule of law, just like black holes and gravity. A high D is somebody who's forceful, opinionated, direct, no nonsense. They're the CEOs and the generals and the loudmouths of the world. High Cs are more like the engineers and scientists of the world, quiet, more reserved, more logical, linear, rational, factual, and so on. And this is a fundamental problem for 95% of the managers in the world. They think when they communicate with any of their directs, they can communicate with them in a way that makes sense to themselves. But if you're a high D and your direct is a high C, they're going to think you're rude. And if you're a high C and your direct is a high D, they're going to think you're incredibly long-winded and a micromanager. So you could, if you're a licensee, come in and say, I'm a high D. How can I write an effective email to my high C direct? Now, I'm going to read this answer, which is dead on. I couldn't have done better myself. I'm tempted now to every once in a while use ChatGPT when I get when I get emails in from the community.
We should build interface to email. Just comes in.
Rather than me handwriting or literally typing every single response that I have to emails. I don't use any of those text expanders. I think the staff use those. I don't. I think when questions come to me, they're expecting me to answer using real words. So what it wrote is, when writing an email to a high C, by the way, just those of you who know DISC, you tell us, you write me. If you have my phone number, text me and tell me whether or not you think this is a good answer. I think it is literally the bomb. When writing an email to a high C, make sure to include all the necessary details and organize your thoughts clearly. As an aside here, I'm going to say, if you don't understand DISC very well, high Ds do not include details and they don't organize their thoughts clearly. We don't. Mike and I will tell you we don't. We're both high Ds. And then the answer goes on. High Cs appreciate comprehensive information. Again, an aside, high Ds don't. So don't leave out any details, even if you think they're irrelevant. See, the tool knows, the vector database knows the high D thinks the details are irrelevant. You can put extra details under an additional information, quote unquote, heading. High Cs don't need personal greetings like hi, Bob, or inquiries about their well-being. They value clear and organized communication. If you need a quick response, which a high D would, they would write things and expect answers back quickly. Let them know that you're okay with their best guess. What is that? 100 words? That is concise and precise, and you could never get that from in the public LLM, ChatGPT, OpenAI, whichever use Google or Microsoft or whatever. You could not get that. You could only get that from us, and you get it a lot better off if you give the context of I'm high D. What about email to a high C direct?
Yeah. And many people who know us, like Dan McGuire, for example, if he's listening to this, is probably going, "Of course you like it. It's your words."
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's fair. Yeah. But even if it was stupid, if it works, it's not stupid. And we know from experience that this works. And I'm going to say one final thing, folks. Everybody, Mike's been alluding to the fact that a lot of people think of me as the guy who knows a lot about management. Everything we talked about today, Mike did himself. We had some help. I think, in fact, Charco Patterson, our friend at Google,
Yes.
Who was just here, by the way, at Sarah and Mai's house over the weekend. He spent a night after a visit in Silicon Valley, was very helpful. And there are others of you who helped, but the coding, the details, working out all the bugs for months and months and months, Mike did it all. And the reason we do that, and maybe we could spend money to have an outside force do it, is because we want to control our IP and we want you to get the best answers you possibly can when it comes to your management problems. So if you're listening and you're not a licensee, we encourage you to become one so you can get virtually immediate answers to any management question for which we have answers. And it's getting to the point where we're starting to cover a heck of a lot of the waterfront. We have a lot more podcasts to write, but a lot of our stuff is already in there.
Yeah, it's been fun. And the fun part is, as I'm going into it and getting to content, I'm reviewing all the stuff we've done in the past, and just amazing what just a regular drumbeat of delivering content every single week, right? Multiple career tools and manager tools. By the way, it has career tools, manager tools, executive tools, all in there. That's just amazing, the amount of content we've produced over the last almost 20 years. There's quite a bit there. Yeah, and it's pretty good, actually, I think. Surprise.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. That's good. Nice one. I'll remove the knife in my back when we finish the recording.
Not bad.
Not
bad. Not bad, dude.
Good.
Not bad.
Thank you. Okay, so folks, that wraps it up. We hope that you will become a licensee if you're not and get answers more quickly than going through the entire archive of our podcasts. And if you're already a licensee, please come and start asking questions and to find out how good it is. I found it fantastic. Mike, thanks for all the hard work you did.
My pleasure.
And that's it for Manager Tools. Come back next week. More great guidance about how to manage your people.
Awesome. Thanks, dude.
You bet, dude.